paid good money to see this movie. When they go out to a theater, they want cold sodas, hot popcorn, and no monsters in the projection booth.
Everyone pretend podcasting isn't boring.
Turn it off.
King Kong, you know the name of King Kong. You know the fame of King Kong. 10 times as big as a man. One day a boy too young to know the danger made a friend of this giant fearsome stranger, and the life they led on their island home became a legend, the legend of King Kong. You know the name of King Kong. You know the fame of King Kong. 10 times as big as a man.
Hey folks, welcome to a very special episode of The Projection Booth. I'm your host, Mike White. On this episode, I'm talking with Ray Morton all about his, well, I can't really say it's a new book because it was out before, but now it has been revised and expanded, so it practically is a brand new book. It is King Kong, The History of a Movie Icon. I had a wonderful time talking with Mr. Morton, and I hope you have a great time listening to this. And definitely check out King Kong, The History of a Movie Icon. Before we start talking about King Kong, I want to know a little bit more about the Ray Morton experience. Can you tell me how you got into writing about movies?
I got interested in movies at a really young age, and I went to film school at NYU, and then I came out here to California to find some way into the industry. I eventually I wrote on a couple of TV shows for a few years, and eventually kind of made my way more into the development world. Turns out I had kind of a knack for developing scripts and things. So I did that for a long time, gave notes on scripts for producers and writers and things like that, was kind of a consultant, really. And I wrote for a long time. I wrote a column for Script Magazine on, screenwriting advice and things like that. And it was writing, and I also wrote articles for them, and that got me starting to do historical articles, originally on screenwriting, and then I just started branching out into other film history topics, and then eventually started work on a King Kong book.
So why King Kong? What attracted you to that subject?
Probably my favorite movie since I was a little kid. The original was just kind of a mind-blowing experience when I first saw it, and I never miss an opportunity to watch it. And I grew up in New York in the early 70s, and we had a local channel there, Channel 9, that just ran all the monster movies. They ran King Kong all the time. I was always glued to the TV, just fascinated with the character. And then as I learned more about filmmaking, really got into how they made it, and that was even more fascinating to me. And then I also was sort of in the sweet spot when the 70s remake was done. And anyone who was around at that time knows that was a major pop culture event. And I just got caught up in all of that too. So when the time came to do some longer form project, Kong was pretty much at the forefront for me.
Well, yeah, you were in New York in the 70s. So did you get to see Kong climbing the World Trade Centers at that time, or?
We almost did. My dad said we could go see the filming, which was in July of 1976. But we ended up moving, and we were supposed to move on a certain date. We ended up moving on another date. We ended up moving the same weekend they were doing it, and he just couldn't get the time away to take us. So I always feel like I got that close, but I didn't get to be there.
You talk about in the intro to this new version of the book how you had to write this on a deadline because of the release of the Peter Jackson film. So what in particular kind of stood out for you as far as if I had the opportunity and then you were finally given the opportunity, if I had the opportunity, I would go back and fix this or expand upon that. What were those big areas that were really kind of sticking in your craw?
The two things is, the first thing, because it was the release of the book was going to be timed for the release of Jackson's film. That was December of 2005. A book has a long lead time because it has to go through this whole production and design process. So I had to have the book in April or May of that year. So I never got to cover the Peter Jackson film. If you read the original version of the book, it has like a 4 or 5 page piece on that film, mostly which I got from the publicity handouts, because I just, there wasn't any information. So I always wanted to make sure that I did that. The other thing that I felt was missing from the earlier chapters, especially for the original film and for the 70s film, was I hadn't gone as deep into the creation of the story and screenplay. And I think for the original film, that was really important because the development process of that story, I find fascinating, because a lot of what we love about that movie didn't come in until fairly late in the writing process of that. And I wanted to give the same attention to the 70s film. So I knew if I was going to do it again, I would go back and expand the sections on the development of the story, which I was able to do.
Tell me a little bit more about Marion C. Cooper, and how has your understanding of him changed over the years?
I feel like it's deepened. He was an amazing character. I always felt like I wanted to make a movie about his life because, he grew up in I think, a fairly aristocratic family in Florida. He went to a couple of military academies, actually, got kicked out of Annapolis, ended up as a Navy flyer in World War I, was shot down and spent time in a prison hospital and prison camp. And when he was shot down, he could have bailed out of his plane and saved himself, except that his gunner was in the plane too, and he didn't want to abandon him. So he ended up staying with the plane, burning his hands. I mean, it was pretty amazing stuff. Then as soon as the war was over, joined up in the Poland-Russia war, and was a flyer all over again, and this time got shot down again and was put in a prison camp, escaped from the prison camp, finally made his way back to New York, became a reporter for the New York Times for a while. Then he was a world explorer for a few years, and then became a pseudo-documentary filmmaker, and then also helped found the aviation industry. So there were all these, he's just an amazing character. I think he's a character who probably can't exist anymore, but back then you could kind of do all these things. Part of my appreciation was I hadn't realized he had been named at one point after David Selznick left, the head of RKO. I hadn't realized how much of a studio person he was. Like, he actually steered the ship on a lot of RKO films in that 1934-35 period. He got Fred Astaire and Ginger Rogers started, and Katharine Hepburn. And so I hadn't realized that aspect of his career so much. They don't talk about it so much. And then he just was, he was involved in Technicolor, the development of Technicolor. He was involved in Cinerama, the development of that. He joined up in World War II for yet another wartime adventure. Like, he just never stopped. and I kind of admire that. He probably had some political views I wouldn't have agreed with, but he was a man of his era. And just a really colorful figure. So I think I came to appreciate him more.
From what I understand, he always insisted that Kong was more than just a monster. And I'm curious what your take on Kong is and why we're still talking about him all these years later.
Cooper had an interesting idea. He wanted Kong to be as frightening as possible. And his idea somehow was that if we were all really frightened of him, we would eventually come to feel his tragedy at the end way more. And I think he was right. Kong continues for all sorts of reasons. I mean, you can start with elemental things. We're all fascinated with apes, and especially gorillas. I mean, they're our closest genetic relatives. We see ourselves mirrored in them. So I think people are, and Cooper had had a point at one time. There was a movie that predated Kong that ended up transforming into Kong called Creation. It was about a bunch of people trapped on an island where there were dinosaurs. And he said the problem with the film is you can't identify with a dinosaur. You can be scared of it, but you can't identify. Kong you can identify with in an odd way. I also think people have we all have fantasies of size and power. And I think that, and especially children, and I think that has a lot of appeal. I also think, whether on purpose or inadvertently, and probably a little of both, the people who created the story for the first film, which was Cooper and then a bunch of other writers, including Edgar Wallace and Ruth Rose and James Krillman, incorporated all of these elements that were common to myth and fairy tales. You have an expedition that travels to a far off exotic land. You go through a fog veil and end up in this mysterious wonderland. It's a primal forest. All of this. You have a great god brought low. You have a primal creature against modernity, battling in New York. All these really elemental themes, and I think that all pulls at us too. And plus, you just have the great imagery, like the giant ape on top of the Empire State Building is pretty hard to resist.
Yeah, it's funny when you're talking about this. I'm like, oh yeah, this is the time of weird tales and Lovecraft. Just this whole idea of going on this expedition and finding this. You could call Kong an elder god if you wanted to.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, he's this fearsome creature who terrifies the natives of the island, and they worship him. I mean, it's all this very primal stuff. I got in trouble with saying this about Godzilla with some Godzilla fans, but I like Godzilla very much. But Godzilla is a force of nature in his better films. And I think that's a great metaphor, but it only goes so far. Whereas Kong taps into all of this stuff. I think it's why we keep coming back to the character over and over again.
Well, yeah, it's interesting too when it comes to Kong, because of so many of these films are, I don't want to say the origin story, because other than the Monsterverse, we don't really get a lot of the origin of Kong, unless I'm mistaken, but just getting this kind of retelling of the same tale in, the original, in the 76, and then in the Jackson version. I mean, it's fascinating to me that they don't bridge a lot of new ground with each one of those remakes.
Each of them adds something to the story, but you're right, it doesn't really go in a new direction. But in the 33 film, he kidnaps this terrified woman, and that's kind of where the relationship stays. And everybody who thinks back on Kong, and if you read a lot of the writing about it that was done in the early 70s, people imagine a relationship between Kong and Anne that actually isn't in the movie. The 70s movie gives that relationship. She's terrified of Kong, but eventually, he saves her life. She appreciates that. She tries to save his life. All of that, which we imagine is in the original film, only comes into it in the 70s. And then I think the 2005 adds something that you could probably have always assumed, but they kind of make it canon, which is that he is the last of his breed. There's a great shot where he enters his cave and you just see bones of previous Kongs. And so that adds, now you have sort of the lonely god myth, the one remaining god. So I think each new version has added something to the basic story. But I think in some ways, like if you look at the sequels and the offshoot, the spin-off ones, and I think it's a thing that fits in with the legendary films. That's a fascinating creature, but it's not King Kong. It's this giant creature, and they build all sorts of other things into it. Kong seems to be about that tragedy, about beauty killing the beast. If you don't have that, you can have a fun like King Kong versus Godzilla or King Kong Escapes, and they're fun movies, but they don't stick in your mind. I think it is the tragedy that sticks in your mind.
Tell me a little bit about what your thoughts on those Japanese films, King Kong Lives, the Rankin and Bass cartoon. I mean, you had to go pretty deep with this book.
It's funny, when I was a kid, if you ask me which of the two feature films, Japanese feature films, I would have said, well, like King Kong versus Godzilla. And then there's this weird one, King Kong Escapes. Again, all staples on Channel 9 when I was growing up. But as I was researching, doing more research for the book, that's kind of switched. King Kong versus Godzilla is a very odd movie. It's probably cheesier than it needs to be, or whatever. It's fun. It's a little goofy, and Kong looks really weird in the movie. He doesn't look like a gorilla. He looks like a macaw, which apparently is what he was based on, because he wasn't supposed to look like the 33 Kong. But it's kind of for kids, and if you can enjoy it on that level, it's fine. I just don't know that there's much more to it than that. King Kong Escapes, I've got a new appreciation for, because it's this very wackadoodle movie. It's a King Kong movie, and they kind of play all the beats of the Kong story. It's also kind of a James Bond movie. It's also a Saturday morning serial, and it's also a comic book. And it's all together in the same movie. And when you're watching it, you're like, none of this really makes any sense, but it's really cool. so so I have come to truly appreciate that. And the Rankin Bass show is, Saturday morning cartoon shows are often kind of, slagged because they're not so good, most of them. The Kong one is actually pretty good. It has some pretty good stories. It has the curse of limited animation, that kind of thing. But the stories are fairly intelligent. Like it's not as dumb as it kind of seems when you first look at it. Kong's everybody's buddy in it. I mean, he's not really very fearsome, but I actually enjoyed that show quite a bit when I watched it when I was a kid, but I rewatched it and it was better than I remember. So
Knowing a little bit about Rankin and Bass, they did a lot of work with Japanese companies, and I imagine that the King Kong show is also a Japanese offshoot or a Japanese production. What is it about the Japanese and King Kong, do you think?
the Japanese love Kong. When the original came out, it was a big hit in Japan, and they actually did a couple of it often is erroneously reported that they did their own King Kong movies in the 1930s. They actually did two movies with King Kong in the title, but both of them were about out of work actors who had to dress up as King Kong. So they weren't really traditional films in that respect. But the Japanese obviously have a great love for giant monsters, and it was the 1952, I think, re-release of King Kong was the second biggest market that it was a hit in was Japan. It was a big hit over here again, and it actually inspired them to make Godzilla. Like Godzilla came about directly as a result of how popular that re-release was. And they have great affection for the character. I don't know that they always know how to do him right, but they love bringing him back. Mechanicong is a hoot as a creation. I always love how they do mechanical versions of their monsters. Just a lot of affection there,
Where do things like Mighty Joe Young or Son of Kong kind of fit into the Kongoverse?
Son of Kong is a direct sequel to the original. It's not nearly as good a picture. It's much cheaper and it's much more limited in scale, but it has some really kind of fascinating elements into it. One of them is it kind of continues the story of Carl Denham, who is kind of a quasi-hero, quasi-villain in the first movie, but a little on the shady side, and he's kind of willing to put people at risk to capture Kong and all that. And he's really down and out in the second film, and over the course of the movie, he kind of redeems himself by helping little Kong. He gets a girlfriend. He gets rich in the end. So it's kind of an interesting development of that character. And, again, the movie is not nearly as good as the first film, but there's some cool animation sequences in it. Little Kong is funny. I don't know if Kong should be funny, but if you're going to do it, they do it okay. So there's some intriguing things in that movie. Mighty Joe Young is interesting because Marion Cooper at one point, at a couple of points, wanted to do Kong sequels, more Kong sequels. He wanted to do one in right after Son of Kong, where they would show what happened when Kong was being brought to the United States. So he was going to escape and they were going to have to recapture him and all that. And RKO and his partner, Ernest Schoedsack, said, let's not do that. And then in the 40s, he wanted to do King Kong versus Tarzan, which he wanted to do as a co-production between MGM and RKO, and both MGM and RKO didn't want to do it. But I think that's where the seeds of Mighty Joe Young came in. And Cooper had a way of, when an idea got a hold of him, he wasn't going to let go of it. So I think he ended up developing what was originally titled Mr. Joseph Young of Africa. That was the original title. And I think he just wanted to make a Kong sequel, so he came up with a offshoot Kong sequel.
I'm always fascinated by projects that have never happened or almost happened. So your whole section, the Kongs that never were, I was riveted the whole time. Of all of those different projects, what were the ones that you really would have wished had made it?
The one that I'm always the most curious about is the proposed Universal film in the 70s that they got into the fight with Dino De Laurentiis and RKO over. I have read the screenplay for that, and it's really good. It is more like the Peter Jackson film in that it is set in the 1930s. So it's not an update the way the Dino one was. And it's really smart. It tells the original story, but it expands things. It does more with Denham. It does a little more with Jack and Ann. And it actually brings in a relationship between Kong and the girl, similar to what we saw in the Dino version. It was a really good script. I have heard different things. They did some pre-production on it. And the story that always sticks in my mind is, and it seems very universal in the 1970s, they originally were going to do it as stop motion animation, and they brought in Jim Danforth, and then kind of quickly realized that stop motion animation done properly, done in the way that it had been done in the 33 film, was going to be way too expensive and way too time consuming. So like Dino, they decided to go for a guy in an ape suit. And Bob Burns tells this very funny story about how he was called in to do some test shots, and he had to wear the Bigfoot outfit from the $6 Million Man, and they had to pin it up because Bob was not a giant the way Andre the Giant was. But the part that always made me laugh is that he said the director of the test at one point told him, "Can you walk in a herky-jerky manner so it looks like stop-motion animation?" So kind of what I feel is they had a great script. I've seen a little bit of the pre-production art, which looked interesting. But if that's what they were going for, there's a thought among some Kong fans that, it would have been much better than the De Laurentiis version. And I'm not so sure this is going to be true. But it's a fascinating project. And the other one that interests me a little bit just for its silliness is Abbott and Costello Meet King Kong. I would have liked to have seen that one, I think.
You definitely know how to research. You have been a scriptwriter, so you know where the bodies are buried a lot of times, but you've been fascinated with Kong for so long. Is there anything that kind of eludes you or escapes you as far as like, oh, I really wish I knew more about this, or I know that this thing exists, I wish I could get my hands or eyes on it?
I wish I had an opportunity to talk to more people connected, obviously, with the 33 film. I've been very lucky to talk to a lot of people involved in the 70s and 80s films. Mr. Jackson has eluded me. I have tried very hard to interview him. I would love to get his take on things, but he was not interested, I guess. I never really got a response. I would love to have talked to him about that. I have been lucky enough to see and actually touch a number of the models that were used in 33. I went to Forey Ackerman's house years ago, and when he still had them, and it was very cool to see those. I never got a chance to actually hold the real armature of Kong. I wanted to see that up close, but when I was trying to get in touch with Bob Burns, he wasn't doing so well, so it never came to be. I'd love to know more about the transition between Kong and Son of Kong, because it came very quickly. I've looked at all of the papers in the RKO records. I guess I wish I had a little more on the behind the scenes, how they came up with the approach they were going to do. So things like that.
There was another let's just say, ripoff of Kong in the 70s. Was it called Ape?
There were two, three actually at the time, but Ape was this kind of weird, was a low budget film made by an American company, but it was made mostly in Korea. It begins with a ship bringing a giant ape, not King Kong, because the poster says not to be confused with King Kong, because De Laurentiis, De Laurentiis was I think the original title was The New King Kong, and then it was changed to Super Kong, and Dino did a lot of suing, so it became Ape, not to be confused with King Kong. It begins with them bringing this giant ape someplace on a ship, and a giant shark comes out because Jaws had just been out, and the shark and the ape fight, and then the ape comes ashore in what we assume is Korea. And it's maybe one of the worst ape costumes I have ever seen. It looks like a carpet, literally. Rick Baker had been approached to do it, but he was busy with the Dino Laurentiis Kong. And what's very fun about the movie is half of it, you can tell they were taking it seriously. And the impression I get is somebody looked at the rushers one day and said, this is so cheesy and so bad that we can't take it seriously. So then at a certain point, it starts camping itself up right in the middle of it. And there's one scene where the gorilla gets so frustrated, he gives the finger to the audience. And I'm like, okay, which I suspect the filmmakers were doing. The interesting thing is it was one of the first professional jobs for Mimi Leader, who ended up directing ER and a bunch of other great television and Deep Impact and a number of features that way. I don't see it on her resume a whole lot, but it was one of her dad produced it. And so I think that's kind of fun. The other one was another Taiwan film called Mighty Peking Man. That was another one where there's this sort of a Yeti kind of Kong creature who falls in love with a bikini-clad cave girl. That's kind of fun. And then the last one is Queen Kong, which is a spoof, obviously British-made spoof, where the leading male character's name is Ray Fay. So it's on that level.
Since you weren't able to write about Jackson's Kong the first time around, other than the brief amount, what's your opinion? I'm so curious. Do you consider it a success?
I have mixed feelings about it. I think there are some things in it that are very successful. I think the thing that most critics and audiences say about the movie is true. I think it's too long, and I think it has too many extraneous elements in it. Like it doesn't have quite enough focus to it. There's a lot of issues with it all through until you get to the Empire State Building sequence, which from what I understand was the first sequence they really worked on in like the storyboarding and previs. And I think that sequence is quite successful. It's the version of The Last Stand that we all played out in our heads when we were kids, where we elaborated on it. I think he did a great job with that. I think it's a mixed bag otherwise. I think Naomi Watts is terrific. I love the score. I think the score is very good. I think there are individual scenes that are great, but I think the bloat really, really does bring it down a bit.
When it comes to the legendary or the Monsterverse, the Monarch films, I guess you'd call them, what are your take on that? How do you feel about those?
They're not my taste in particular, but when I was watching the last one, I think it was Godzilla times Kong, or however it is you're supposed to say that, Godzilla X Kong, I was surrounded by a bunch of families and kids, and they loved it. And my take on them is they are the modern equivalent of the Japanese films. They're Saturday morning movies for kids that maybe families can enjoy also. I think they take Kong in a very interesting direction, which is by the end of that, the third of their films, to me, he's more of a character from Edgar Rice Burroughs than he is Marion Cooper's Kong, because he's this very intelligent creature who can create sophisticated technology and traps and wields super sophisticated weapons, who rules over an ancient kingdom that he is the king of. Like, that all feels very, Haggard or Burroughs to me, way more than the Cooper Kong. So it's an interesting way to go. I find them a little too busy, especially the last two. It's a little hard to follow them sometimes. What's going on, you know? Um, they might indulge silliness a little more than I would want, but
For me, there's a big difference between Skull Island and then the rest of them. It feels like Skull Island is somewhere up here and the rest of those monster verses are down here.
they get progressively sillier as they go along. Skull Island is an interesting one. If you study it really closely, except for the helicopter attack when they first meet Kong and the final battle, Kong really doesn't have much to do with the movie. He kind of wanders around in it. So I actually found it a little boring when I first watched it, but it has one image that I really, really love. I love when Hiddleston and Larson are standing on this little mountain outcrop and Kong just comes out of the fog at them and they interact with him. That's a really lovely moment. I think the rest of it is a little, like I said, a little dull in spots. But once he gets going, it's always fun, you know.
Is there a particular Kong production in film history that you think people have been unfair to, one that you think needs more credit?
I think the 70s one. The 70s one has a reputation among film people or certain film people, certain fans, and then it is unfortunately filtered out to the big world, which is first of all that it was a critical bomb, and second of all that it was a flop. And it was neither of those things. Its reviews ranged from mixed to good. And it did well at the box office. What it didn't do was beat Jaws, which is what all the expectations at the time were. So if you're going by that guideline, it didn't make it. But otherwise, it was successful. The other thing is, I do not think it is a classic on the level of the first film. The first film stands by itself in that respect. But it adds so much to the Kong legend. I like that it's an updated version because I think they've done the 1933 version, like you had to come at it from a different point of view. And there's a lot of the ideas and there are a lot to like. It gets a little shoddy in the second half because they were rushed for production. And so there's some of the composites and things aren't quite as good. Like I think in the early part of the film, it's quite good. And I do think the final shot of the movie, the pullback from Kong and Jessica Lange, is about as cool a Kong shot as you're ever going to see. I also think it has a great score by John Barry. It's got goofy stuff in it. It's got some stuff that hasn't aged well, but I think it's a worthy entry. And I would really wish people would stop referring to it as a bomb because it's not.
I seem to remember really liking that one. Again, I saw it when I was a kid, so I don't know if it's nostalgia glasses, but just the cast of that movie was fantastic.
I mean, it was Jessica Lange's first film, and yeah, Jeff Bridges kind of when he was still in his young action hero phase. I think Grodin's great in it. Yeah, I think Rene Auberjonois is really good. Because he provides sort of the eye-rolling disbelief character. I think the production looks great. Some of the miniature stuff isn't quite as good as it could be. But the wall and the World Trade Center stuff, like there's so much in it that's good, and it went its own way, which I liked too.
You've written 2 books about Kong, or second edition. Is there a third one on the way?
Well, what's funny is right as I was putting the manuscript to bed, Legendary announced they're going to do another one. So I'm like, does this mean I have to do a third edition? And people have already written me with some information, new bits. So I'm going to start a file and we'll see what kind of energy I have in 10 years or so. and we'll see about that. But
what else are you working on these days?
Got a new project that I'm working on that's going to deal with the science fiction and fantasy films of the 70s and 80s. So I'm working on that and then researching another project, which I'm not going to say a whole lot about right now. Yeah, so a couple of good things coming up, I hope.
Well, as a child of the 70s, definitely keep me in mind for that science fiction fantasy book. I'd love to talk to you about it.
Absolutely will. When it's closer to completion, I'll let you know.
Do you have a website or a social media presence that we can point people to?
Yeah, I have a website, raymorton.com, which people can go to and they can contact me through that. And I have an Instagram. I have two. One is Ray Morton 1, if they want to look at that. And one is King Kong Movie Icon. And then there's a Facebook page, King Kong History of a Movie Icon. So if people want to check those out, happy to interact.
Well, Mr. Morton, thank you so much. This was great talking with you.
Well, thank you. I really appreciate you having me. I'm a big fan of the show, so it's a great thrill to be on.
On an island with a mountain in the shape of a skull, there live natives in a village beneath a towering wall. A giant bolted door stood more than half a mile tall, behind which lived the mightiest creature of them all.
King Kong, the white man done you wrong, and so we sing this song to you. Mighty Kong, King Hunga, Hunga, Hunga Kong, get a load of mighty Kong.
On a puny ship of iron, across a sweltering sea, Robert Armstrong sailed to enslave the greatest of the free.
I'll catch the eighth wonder of the world for all mankind to see.
He even brought a blonde along to keep Kong company.
I'm Fay, Fay Ray.
Why do you run away?
Kong only wants to play with you.
So come on, Faye. What do you say? Hey!
With gas bombs they captured Kong and brought him back alive. Though very few of Armstrong's crew were destined to survive, till finally on the Broadway stage the mighty Kong arrived, but broke his chains and wrecks and trains, so great was his sex drive.
Up the side of the Empire State, I climbed with my Fay Ray to kill the planes and gun me down. The sun set on my day.
'Twas beauty killed the beast at last.
I heard Bob Armstrong say,
And Kong, we all were real impressed, you made a big hit on Broadway.
King Kong, the white man done you wrong, and so we sing this song to you. Mighty Kong, King get the load. All right, Kong, this is Lieutenant Dan Matthews, Highway Patrol. We got an APB out on you. Now come on down from that building. We got you surrounded. I got a bunch of bananas down here. Nobody makes a monkey out of me. That big gorilla wants to know top. I'll show him top. 10-4.
You fight him down.
I'll beat the snot out of